Quoi de neuf, le joueur? Je suis de retour avec une autre critique de jeu épique. C'est l'histoire de deux frères et ceux qui se battent pour survivre dans la France médiévale alors qu'ils sont poursuivis par l'Inquisition. C'est A Plague Tale, Innocence. Oh, that was weird. Oh! Plague Tale. Right, yeah, okay. A Plague Tale, Innocence, is a stealth action-adventure game brought to you by the team responsible for such epics as Monopoly Plus and Disneyland Adventures. This is their first project that is an original, narrative-driven action-adventure experience. Very first one, not something they've ever attempted before, and for a first attempt, it's certainly impressive and a nice surprise. The game was published by Focus Home Interactive, who are known for publishing games with interesting concepts that often fumble in their execution. Some of them are real stinkers. But here we have this, A Plague Tale. What is it? I'm glad you asked. A Plague Tale is about a couple of estranged siblings in medieval France who get caught in the crosshairs of the Inquisition. Amicia has to protect her younger brother, though she doesn't really know him or his role in what's to come. So over the course of this game, the two siblings have to find a way out of their predicament. As if the Inquisition wasn't bad enough, there's a plague going around, and with plagues come rats. And these are the worst rats of all time. Oh no, not the dog! The stakes are high, and these kids go through a lot. So is it enjoyable to go on this journey with them? Well, yes! Well, I suppose I could actually go into a little more detail. If there's one area this game excels in, it's definitely the characters and dialogue. Not to say that the other aspects are bad necessarily, but this stands out. The dynamic between Hugo and Amicia in particular is great, which it kind of has to be as they're together for most of the game. It's kind of an interesting relationship in premise alone. They're siblings, and yet they hardly even know each other, thanks to Hugo being locked away most of the time. That said, an idea is only as good as its execution. Luckily, the team at Asobo seemed quite capable of creating a believable relationship between a couple of estranged, yet related kids, and the actors' performances strengthen the foundation that the writing lays. This goes for pretty much all the kids we see in the game, although at times I found myself wanting more from Amicia's voice actor, but she does a solid job, and by the end I came to appreciate the performance. In terms of broader plot stuff, there are definitely some familiar tropes and character types. The antagonist of the game is pretty much an evil wizard dude, but there are also a couple twists that caught me completely by surprise, and they made sense. They weren't just conjured up without setup. Although there is one scene that doesn't seem to fit with everything else. Without spoiling anything, there's a scene in the latter half of the game that gets oddly abstract. It's sort of a dreamlike sequence that has actual consequences, and it's unclear what's actually happening or why the scene unfolds the way that it does. And it's the only scene like it in the game. I wouldn't necessarily say this is a negative, but it was a bit confusing. The rats are another major aspect of this game's world. There's a lot of rats in this game. Like, imagine as many rats as you can possibly picture at once in your head. That's about how many rats are in this game. And they're the most ravenous rats you've ever seen. They'll eat just about anything, living or dead, in a matter of seconds. They operate as a collective, and you don't want to find yourself stuck in the dark with them. The rats are basically unstoppable in the absence of light. Even a stacked knight, decked out in full armor, will be devoured instantly without a torch. They're a force to be reckoned with, and they can be downright frightening at times. Overall, the story in this game kept me interested all the way through, and Amicia and Hugo's interactions especially stuck out. See, the cool thing about Hugo and Amicia is that if you explore the world thoroughly, you can actually get more interaction between the two.
They're carnations. We had some in my herbarium, but those ones are prettier.
Hugo, we have to keep moving.
Wait, come here.
What?
It will protect you, and is pretty too.
Oh, all right.
Now we can go.
Thank you, Hugo.
You're welcome.
Oh my god, my boy is too precious for this world. It's not all sunshine and carnations, of course. They have their squabbles, but these moments are compelling as well. And the conflict doesn't feel forced, especially considering they are kids. Everything feels natural. Honestly, I feel like the story is worth the price of admission. But wait! There's more! This game is a bit more involved with its gameplay than it lets on at first. When I first started playing, I assumed it would be mostly a bunch of crouch walking with the occasional rock thrown or vase broken, but the use of alchemy allows the devs to expand Amicia's arsenal a fair bit. There's even a mechanic saved for the late game that spices things up even further. Amicia has an upgrade tree for her sling, among other things. These upgrades are dependent upon materials that you find in the environment, so those who keep a watchful eye will be rewarded. The sling itself is a bit awkward to use. Even by the end, I never really got into a rhythm with it, but it is a sling. I imagine the developers intended it to feel less like a proper weapon and more like something that was repurposed for combat. This kind of becomes an issue towards the end when they throw a lot of stuff at you at once, expecting you to take all of it out with the sling quickly, especially since these moments have a lot of momentum and story impact. Having to redo these segments can kind of ruin the moment. And while Amicia sometimes ventures alone, much of the game is spent with some form of companion, whether it be little Hugo or another character you meet on your journey. Some of these allies can provide you with additional gameplay mechanics in the form of actions they perform for you, and sometimes your ally will perform actions that will save you from having to use up your own resources, which is nice if you really want to get all those upgrades. As you might imagine, the game's enemies are split into two types. You've got your humans, the Inquisition, hunting you down, and then there are the rats. The approaches for these two types of enemies are very different. Different alchemical tools and different tactics need to be utilized for both. The atmosphere for each is different as well. There's tension when you're sneaking through an enemy encampment or an occupied village for sure, but there's a certain dread that comes when the rats appear. They're practically a hive mind with no desire but to consume. What's worse than the fear factor with the rats is the revulsion, the viscera. It's not always a direct result of them, but it's often caused by their presence, and it's often exhibited in livestock. There's a particularly gruesome scene with the horse. Not this one though, he's okay. While the approaches for the two enemy types are different, there's not a ton of room for experimentation. There's usually one or two ways to tackle an obstacle, and often the secondary method is just a waste of precious resources. You'll mostly be doing something the developer laid out for you. This is true of the game overall. And this sounds like a negative, but there's something to be said for a fine-tuned experience. There are specific moments that evoke specific feelings. When your path is blocked by one or multiple guards, your course of action is pretty much predetermined, and Asobo have crafted the moment to create as much tension as they can. The moment is timed out for maximum butt clenching. This isn't true for every moment in the game. There are areas that are a little more open that you can take different routes through, maybe try a couple different tactics. But this game has way more specifically crafted moments than, say, a Ubisoft game. And while I don't see this as an overall negative, there are some scripted actions in the game that leave me scratching my head. What? Oh, really? We're just leaving the torch behind.
Quick now. Hugo! What's going on?
Okay, see, I feel like a torch would really help in this situation. Yeah, no, it's fine. We don't need a torch, it's fine. There aren't very many video gamey annoyances like this in the game, but leaving a perfectly good torch behind seems like a serious liability. I mean, look at that. Come on, So Focus Home Interactive has a reputation for publishing games with interesting ideas that ultimately come out kind of janky. That said, I think this game came out really well. I did feel there was a little bit of stiffness in some of the animations and some of the textures weren't of the highest quality, but I had also just played Detroit Become Human before playing this, and that game reveled in its visual presentation. So many emotions. Before long, I was too wrapped up in the world and invested in the characters to notice these kinds of things. I'm reminded in some ways of Hellblade, a strong story with a smaller, more focused scope. Asobo really made the most of what they had. I would say they even have an edge in gameplay. Unless you completely missed some of the combat mechanics in Hellblade or really wanted to find all the lore stones, there wasn't much reason to go back through, even if it was fairly enjoyable the first time. There's a bit more variety and freedom in A Plague Tale's combat. Not that I would change the combat in Hellblade. I think the style of combat they used is perfect for that game. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is, if you enjoyed Hellblade, there's a good chance you'll like this game too. I do want to point out one bit of sound design that kept bugging me. Whenever you're sneaking through an enemy encampment and someone starts to see you, there'll be Jesus! That sound would play every time someone even caught a glimpse of me. And if you'll excuse me, I'm going to put on my very normally sized hood that I bought to remain unnoticed. I appreciate that the game is trying to give me an audio cue to get my attention, but this sound seems misplaced. It's a little too urgent. It feels like I've already been caught, but I've actually still got time to hide. And for whatever reason, it seemed to happen less and less the further I got into the game. Toward the end of the game, the little icon would sometimes fill up with no audio cue. Speaking of audio, I have to give a shout to the game's music. You're listening to it now. It does a great job of setting the world's tone and greatly enhances some of the already good gameplay moments. The flittering strings that accompany the rats, the lower chaotic tones that indicate danger, the plucked tunes that play during the fleeting moments of peace. There's a lot of good stuff here. This game finds a stylistic footing right out of the gate. The opening sequence is a pretty good indicator of what the audio and visuals are like. There are basically two modes of color throughout the game: brighter, more vibrant arrangements, and darker, dismal palettes. The game tends to linger in the latter more often, as it's more indicative of the events that unfold, but the more vibrant scenes serve as a respite from all the dread and exhaustion of the rest of the game. Basically, the visuals go hand in hand with the gameplay and writing. Even when the environments are dismal, dark, or downright gross, they're fully rendered and realized. As I said, the game may not have insanely high-res textures, but the art direction more than makes up for it. Asobo has really crafted a believable world with engaging characters, great atmosphere, and decent gameplay. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'd say it's almost as good as Monopoly, out of 10. But seriously, from a storytelling perspective, Asobo has knocked it out of the park with this one. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being the game I remember most fondly from this year. A Plague Tale's gameplay is probably its weakest aspect, but it's still quite enjoyable to play, at least once or twice. I cannot recommend this game highly enough. If you're into story-driven, third-person action-adventure games as I am, this is one that should definitely not be overlooked.